Welcome to day 11 of learning Python with data science. And today I'll basically be introducing a new topic, which is MySQL. In the last video, which is day 10, I talked about how to install your SQL into your PC. So basically I'm going to break down what database is, what MySQL is. First of all, MySQL is also known as MySQL. That's what we call it. So whenever you hear MySQL and you hear MySQL, please don't mistake those two together. They're the same thing. MySQL is a database, right? One important of why we use MySQL and why people use MySQL: number one, it is easy to use. Number two, it is secured. Number three, client and server architecture. MySQL Workbench is easy to use. The query are simple. You just have to know the keywords and how to implement them, right? So that is why basically I said this course is going to be running for only 3 days. That means starting from today, 2 and 3. That's all. Then we just attempt a whole project. We are getting close to our data science in full. Then another thing is the GUI support. GUI support means graphical user interface. The whole graphic that a user can interact with. It means a thing that you can basically use your mouse to hover on, right? Like sign in, filling in your username. All those things you're basically doing there is a graphical user interface. Then we have another thing known as the CLI, which is the command line interface. That means the one you only use your keyboard, not even your mouse, only your keyboard, right? But it has the CLI and also have the GUI interface, which makes it easy. Everyone likes the GUI interface. Those are the features of MySQL and why basically we're using MySQL Workbench. SQL variables and data types, what you have to understand about them, right? So in the beginning of this course, when we talked about Python in general, I basically explained what variables are and I explained different type of data types. I'm expecting you now in this stage that you are to already understand what variables are, right? Because I think in my last videos, if you check them, I basically broke down each of those particular variables to the simplest form. All my videos are self-explanatory because I took my time to get the concepts for you guys to basically understand them. First of all, what are variables? Variables are used for storing data or information during execution of a program. So another one is a way of labeling data with an appropriate name that helps to understand the program more clearly by the reader. Variables are used to store data. That means you can put in data there and you use them to store them, right? Just like a container. So whenever you have a container, you put in something, neither your spices, whatever you want to put in that container, and like I said, you give it what? A label. That means whoever sees that particular container will know, oh, this particular container is holding this particular thing. The next thing we have is what? The data types. We have 3 types of data types. I'm going to explain each of these particular data types. The first one, which is the numeric data type. The numeric data type just only contains numbers and decimal. And we have different types. We have the tiny integer, the small integer, the medium integer, the integer itself, the big integer, the float, the double, the decimal, right? These are all the numeric data type that we have in MySQL. All those type of integers or all those type of data type have their own specification on how they work. They can contain more type of characters and stuff like that inside of them. All the integers and floats are under the numeric data type. Then we go to date and time. Date and time is what I talked about, I think, in my day 9. Date and time is also a data type in MySQL, because let's say a user purchased something this certain date and this certain time, and you want to be able to save that particular thing, there must be a particular data type that will understand date and time inside of the environment, right? So that is why date and time is there. Features like year, date, time, timestamp, and date time. So in the string data type, we have different type of string data type. We have the varchar, we have the tiny text, we have the medium, we have the long text, and so on and so forth. Then booleans, you know what booleans is? It's still the same thing, true or false. So whenever you hear the booleans, it's neither what true or false. So all these are the data types and the variables that we have in MySQL. So I've basically explained what MySQL is, I've explained what database is in the simplest form, and I've basically told you guys the features of MySQL. Let's unbox our software. We've been keeping it for so long. Let's bring it out from where it is, right? So we're going to basically go down to the main thing right now. We're going to unbox it and we're going to see the things and how to implement all this stuff and how to play around with them. So I'm going to just basically brief on the CLI aspect of MySQL, then straight to the workbench and see how we can implement all this particular thing. Okay, so For those that don't know what we're talking about, you've not installed the software, I've done the favor by showing you how to download the software and how to install it. So check my last video on day 10, right? Day 10, you would see how I basically explained how to install all the stuff. When you see MySQL, you're going to see a folder like this. You just click on this drag down. So when you see this file, what I want you to do straight is to click on this first one, which is the CLI, right? The command line. So you have the CLI. The first thing is basically going to tell you is to enter your password. And if you checked my video, I specifically said that whenever you're creating your file, do not forget your password. So now we're going to enter that particular password inside of this particular place, right? After entering my password, I would hit enter. So now as I hit enter, you can see it's telling me welcome to MySQL monitor, stuff like that. Whenever you're using MySQL is not key sensitive, so you don't have to be scared of that aspect. So but basically you have to be mindful of what you're using. So I can say show, in front of it I'll say databases. So, and the exact time it ran, right? So you can see it's 0.10 seconds. 0.10 seconds, that is microseconds, not even up to 1 second. So that's our first query, right? MySQL, we don't write code, we write queries. You don't code there, we only write queries whenever you're using MySQL. Right here, right now, I can basically create a database, right, of my own. Creating a database is easy. It's nothing difficult when creating your database, right? So keep that in mind whenever you want to create a database. You don't think it's a whole big thing. It's just like me saying I want to build a warehouse where I'm going to be keeping some particular goods that's going to be shipping from abroad or something, right? Renting the place is easy, but the main thing now is now getting the goods. It's not about getting the place where the goods are going to stay. So creating a database is easy. It's as simple as anything. So now let's create our first database. So I'll come in and I'll say create database. Then I'll come in and say blue ghost. So blue ghost, I'll say create database blue ghost. So I hit enter. You can see query okay. That means I don't have any issue with my query at this point. So, and it takes 0.02 seconds to run this particular query. Then if I come here and I say show databases, I hit enter, you can see we now have what? Blue ghost inside of our database. So I've eventually created our database. You can see I didn't use anything like mouse here. All I used was what? My keyboard. That is why it's called the CLI. So we have the blue ghost there as the database that we created. Then let's go to the next thing. Let's say I want to take away this particular database. So the first thing I'm going to do is to come here and say drop database. Then in front of it we'll say blue ghost. So drop database blue ghost. So if I hit enter, you can see query okay. So if I come here as well and I say show databases, I hit enter, you see we no longer have blue ghost. There's still so many things we can do, but this is going to be all for the CLI. The rest is going to be the GUI. That's where we're going to be working mostly. So the CLI is just a command line where we just use only our keyboards to work with, right? Then the GUI is basically where we're going to use the graphical user interface and we can see the things that we're going to be doing there. Okay, so let's quickly go straight to the GUI as well. So we'll close this particular one. Next thing we're going to do is to come to our software. So look for MySQL, this particular place. You click on the drop down, then you're going to come to this MySQL Workbench 8.0, then hit enter. Okay, so something like this is going to open up for us, right? I want you to click on this local instance. This is just like a connector, right? You can have multiple connectors, but this is the first connector you're going to be having with your local host, which is 3306. Then I hit on this particular place, your passcode. Then okay, then it's going to take a while. It's going to open the interface. At first, when this interface opens, this is exactly what you're going to see. So this particular place can be so confusing, but now you can see we interact with other places, which is the GUI. This is what we call this particular thing, the GUI, right? First of all, one thing I should always tell you guys is Coming to this area, I'll zoom in here. You can see all these things, take it as your windows, right? So whenever you need a fresh air, you open it, you see ventilation will start coming from that particular place. But whenever you don't need it, let's say it's cold, you close that window. Client that's going to be fetching information from the database, then other user privileges, and different people can be connected to this whole database. Then data export, other stuff. But all these ones are for companies or people that are going to be using it, that basically specify with the database. Then the main thing I want you guys to pay attention is the schemas, right? Schemas are also known as what? Database. Hover on that place and you hit on it, so you can see the particular default database that MySQL gives to you, right? So you can see anytime you create your database, this is where you're going to find them. Now all you just have to do is to close that window. As you can see, that particular place is closed. Action output is an action message where you basically will see your mistakes. Let's say you have an error, you want to know what's going on that is making your particular query not to run. This is where it's going to tell you the message and tell you the action or necessary thing that you have to do and the time or whatever that is needed. So let's say this database, I may not need it. All I just have to do is hit on this window. You can see that particular place is closed. Let's say I don't need the action output as well. I hit there. You can see it's closed as well. I have a plain sheet that I can work with. This is the most important part of everything. But let's say I need my database. I can open up that window and I'll be able to see that area. We go straight to all these navigators, starting from the file. You can see we have new model, open MySQL script, open SQL. All these things you basically have in your file navigators whenever you open a file. Then edit, redo, stuff like that, view, home. All these things are just things that basically we may use later on. Okay, so here is just to add a new worksheet, SQL file, SQL folders, database, search, and so on and so forth. We're going to basically dive into the main thing, which is creating a database. Then from creating a database, see other things that we can do with this database, right? In the other CLI, you can't basically delete, but here you can delete, you can modify your query and do some adjustment. So that's why the GUI is always preferable. The first thing we're going to do is to create a database, which I'm going to come here and write a query, create database. After this, all I just have to do is to run the query. If I run the query, you're going to see that we already have, it tells me what, create one row have been affected. That means it's created a database for me. Then I try running it again. It said can't create database because database exists. So this message is what's going to tell you what's going on in your database. So when you don't see the database in your whole navigator in this particular area, you come here, you hit the refresh, you should see your database here. So you can see Blue Ghost is already allocated there. So we've created our database. So what are the things that we can do in this database? So if you hit on this arrow that points to the right side, if you hit on it, you see we have tables, we have views, we have all the things that we can do with this database. I can create a table, and trust me, tables are the structured data that we have. I'm going to show you easiest way for you to create a table. So let's quickly create our table. So the first thing we're going to do, like I said, you hit this arrow that turns to the right, something like this drops down, then right click on the table, then hit on create table. When you hit on the create table, so another interface is going to come up like this. The first thing you're going to do is to give it a table name. Mind you, this is the easiest part of creating a table. There's a part that you're going to use query as well. So you're going to give it a table name. Mine is going to be, let's say, nuggets. That's the table name. You always give it a table name. All this particular aspect is none of your concern, especially when you're the one creating it. This particular thing may be obstructing, so all you just have to do is neither you click on this up arrow that looks like this, then it comes up, right? So in this particular area, you're going to start with a column name. If you've ever seen your Excel, you see that your Excel have column A, B, C, D, E, F, T, whatever, Z. Then you will see that in the rows we have the numbers, right? The numbers in which correlates with those columns. We're going to write a column name. So let's say these nuggets are just for the employees, right? The employees, people that work in this particular place. So the first thing I will say, column name, I double tap there. You can see nuggets, I remove it. Then I will come here and say employee name. And in the employee name, you have to be mindful of the data type that is there. The data type that is going to be used matters a lot. Right here, the data type is an integer. I have to change it to a string. So why am I changing it to a string? Because an employee name is a string format. You write them with characters, right? What can contain those characters is known as what? Varchar. So I'm going to use the varchar. We have different type of string that we can use, but the preferred one is what? Varchar. So I hit on the varchar. You see, there is a parenthesis after the varchar. So inside of this parenthesis, I will now specify the length at which I want that employee name to contain. Have you ever been in a scenario whenever you're writing your name, they are going to count the character length at which you're writing, right? They know that your name cannot be longer than 300 characters. So the next thing they're going to tell you is that you've exceeded the limit, the character limit, and you have to now neither reduce your name, right? Or you choose a shorter name. It's the same thing here. We're going to set a limit at which the user cannot exceed that particular character limit. So here I want it to be 200. Then the next line is the PK and the NN. The PK means primary key, then the NN means not null. The primary key means, do you want to make this particular thing an identifier for each of this particular column that will be coming up? No, I don't want to make employee name the primary key. So I'll uncheck this particular thing. Then not null means, can this particular field be ignored? You can see sometimes whenever you're filling something online, let's say you're trying to sign up to Facebook, you will see whenever you don't fill your name and you try to sign up, it's going to tell you, hey, you're missing an existing field, or you have to fill up an existing field. Then you will now have to be forced to go and fill in your name. So that not null means that this particular column cannot be empty. The next line is another column. You're going to just double click on it. Something like this will come up, right? But you have to basically make sure that you've done all these areas before it's going to allow you to go to the next line. So what other information do I need for my employees? I can decide to get my employee gender. So I can say the gender of that my employee. The next thing is what? Is it varchar? Yes, of course, it's varchar. Then I want to also reduce the length, right? Let's say 8, right? Then you will say what? Not null. That means you don't want that particular area to be left empty. Check that area. Then after you're done, all you just have to do, you want to impute another column name, just double tap. You see, you have another thing that you can put. I can come here and I can say I want to impute the address. I can say home address. Then the home address is going to be what? Varchar, right? Varchar. So in the varchar, I can a little bit increase this because there are some people home address that are super long. So I can say 260, then also not null. You know, you can just keep on adding different column names, just like the way you add column names in your Excel, right? It's the same thing that we're doing in our workbench, just to make it easier for us. So you can see, I can come to the next line. I can say I want to have their phone number. And in the phone number, I can come here. I'm also going to put varchar, so it should not be more than 12. Then hit not null. Some people say, why is phone number not integer? Yes, your phone number cannot be integer because the main reason of them getting your number is not that so that they can just basically do something with it. It's just for them to save the information. In case of something happens to the employee, they can be able to reach the employee. So there's no need for you to put it in an integer form. So what are the things that we can put in integer? So let's take this a little bit downwards, then double tap and say age. I can come here and use what? Int. Hit on int. Int, you can see we don't have any parentheses in front of integer, so we have what? Not null as well. We'll come to the next line. Let's also see dates. So we're going to have DOB, which is the short form for date of birth. Then in the date of birth, I'm going to come here to change the particular data type. I'm going to come here, I'm going to use what? Date. Not date time, but what? Date. I hit on what? On the date. Now register that particular column as what? Date. Add what? Not null. The last thing but not the least is to add a primary key. You can basically create your primary key at the beginning of whenever you're creating your column or at the end of your column. It doesn't matter wherever you're creating your primary key. I will say employee ID. In front of the employee ID, I will change this guy, and we want to make it what? An integer. I change it to an integer data type. Then I have to check this pk, which is what? The primary key. Please pay attention to this icon here that we have. You can see at this particular thing, it looks like a diamond shape, right? But see, as I check this particular pk, this particular icon is now what? Like a keyword icon. Automatically it checks what? Not null. That means it is needed. Do you understand? So what is the primary key, and why do I call it an identifier? It's just something that you use to identify a particular thing. Let me give you an example. There are 5 people that answers John Doe. So how do I differentiate from this other John Doe to this other John Doe? Is by giving them what? An identification. I can say John Doe 1, John Doe 2, John Doe 3, John Doe 4, and John Doe 5. Whenever I call John Doe 5 already knows himself, right? So that 5 I'm adding to that particular John Doe's is what? An identifier. The same thing for institution. When you're in college, there are different people in college, right? They will give them something known as what? A college number, right? Over here I say they call it matriculation number. They give them a matriculation number in which they are going to use to identify each student, because you can't say you want to use the name of the student to identify them, because they are different people answering the same name, right? Exactly. Before we stop, one thing I want you to keep in mind, so you click on this apply, it takes you to this particular SQL script to database. So it's going to show you every review that you've made. This is just for you to check out everything. I can see my table name is what? Nuggets, right? So in the nuggets, I have all this employee information that I need. All I just have to do is hit apply. You can see it is done. It has basically what? Made changes to my database, and I click on what? Finish. So I'm done. I can basically exit by hitting this X icon. If I refresh this particular place, you can see underneath this blue ghost, there is a sign there. Before there was no sign, but now there is a sign pointing to the right, right? So if I hit that, you can see we now have what? Nuggets. So in the nuggets, if I hit on the nuggets, you can see we have columns, because it's columns that we created. If I hit on the columns, you can see we now have every columns that we need. Some people will ask, why is this particular place needed? This thing is just to show you your information. The schema that I'm in is Blue Ghost. If I hit on the columns, you can see every columns that I have. I'm going to continue from this. I'm going to show you how we add rows and other things we can do with this MySQL. This is just the first phase of MySQL. We have 2 more days to go for MySQL. But for this particular area, for this section, we're going to stop here. Please just go over everything stage by stage. Do your research. Make sure that you follow guidance. And if you have questions, make sure you hit on the description. There is a particular link that's going to take you to a Telegram. Please, if you benefited anything so far, hit on the like button and also hit on the subscribe button if you're new. Trust me, Blue Ghost breaks down everything, both in the financial sectors and in data analytics. We are there. We love analysis. We deal with analysis over here, right? So if it's your first time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and we'll meet in the next class. Make sure you stay safe. As always, stay profitable. Have a nice day.